We need to talk about plotting. I love to plot stories. My favorite part of the writing process, one of my favorite parts of the writing process, is the actual planning for writing the book. And I used to find it really, really difficult to move from that planning stage into the actual drafting stage. And I realized that I needed to come up with a plan that worked specifically for me. At the end of the day, I wanted to make something that was usable for any story I wrote. I had read craft books, I have a degree in creative writing, and I was just like, man, I straight up have no idea what I'm doing. Like, I don't know how to write books no matter how hard I try. Spoiler note, I now know how to write books, so that's sick. If you guys know anything about me, you know that I absolutely adore the beat sheet. I think that Blake Snyder's Save the Cat and Jessica Brody's Save the Cat Writes a Novel are two of the most incredible craft books. Two of the most incredible craft books. When I was graduating college, I was pretty sure that I was going to pursue screenwriting. That was something that I really, really loved. So I was very familiar with the Save the Cat model, the Save the Cat beat sheet, following those beats to build a story. I was familiar with that. That was something that made sense to me. I also really like to write metrical poetry, and I like that the structure forces you to think new and creative ways. I had to use my big ol' noggin to figure out that I was getting really, really overwhelmed trying to think of the whole picture all the time. What I've done instead is what I call a scene book. A scene book is exactly what it sounds like. It's a book of scenes. But today I want to show you guys how I set up my scene book and hopefully teach you how you can make one too. A scene book is a plotting tool that can be used with any plotting structure. Whatever structure you want, a scene book can work for it. At its core, a scene book is basically just a notebook where each page is dedicated to one single scene. This helps me focus, it helps narrow down exactly what I need to work on, and it keeps me on track. A scene book is also just quite literally the only way I know how to plot stories. Like, I don't know how to move from the planning stage into the drafting stage without a scene book. I don't know. So there are a few things that you'll need to get started. These are pretty self-explanatory. I don't feel like it's like a huge surprise. Basically, you'll definitely want a notebook. This is the one that I used for my first book. It has been well loved. This was for the first draft of my first book I ever wrote. The first book I ever finished. And it's filled with lots of good notes, and this is the only reason I finished writing that book. This is the one I want to start filling out today. I especially like these Staples steno books. These are just the ones I use, but you could really use any notebook you have, any notebook you like. That stray notebook at the bottom of your closet that you bought 4 years ago at TJ Maxx and you kind of forgot about, break it out. That's what we'll use today. I prefer to use these specifically for the way they're made, the way that they exist. Mostly because it's really easy for me to flip through the pages. I make sure I literally only see one page at a time, and that is something that is huge for me and for the scene book, in my opinion, to be successful. And I like that the steno books have the line right down the center. This is something that I use in the formatting. You can figure out what works for you. You don't have to do it exactly this way. You'll see in my books that I also use an abundance of sticky notes. You can use whatever sticky notes you have, whatever colors you want. I find these especially important for being able to move things around, being able to swap things out. I don't know if it's just me. I don't think it is. I tend to get a little bit paranoid about putting pen to page, feeling like, oh my god, I'm going to ruin this notebook. One, you're not going to ruin the notebook. For twosies, instead, just try using a post-it note. Any sticky note will work. Like I said, you can use as many different colors as you want, as many different sizes as you want. I tend to cut mine, trim them, shape them, make them exactly what I need in the space at the moment. And these are optional. You don't have to use these. You'll see that I use a lot of them. And so if you're like, ooh, wasteful, just skip it. Just skip it. You also definitely want something to write with. I use these cheap little Bic pens. They have like a cap and everything. You can use whatever you want. Also have these Tombow pens, and I didn't use these in my first scene book because I literally just didn't have them. I might use them to spruce things up, to add some color, to make it cute. Totally optional. You can use whatever you want to write with. I also just don't like pencils, so if you want to use a pencil, by all means use a pencil. I also like to use tape just to tape down the sticky notes once I'm done with them. For me, I hate the idea of like the corners getting creased and like folded and wrinkled, and I don't want anything to do with that, so I just tape it down. And then, like I said, I love to use the Save the Cat beat sheet, so I always keep Save the Cat Writes a Novel or the original Save the Cat by my desk at all times when I'm planning. This is such a helpful tool for me, but you don't have to use it if you don't want to. I know everybody's brains work differently, so if Save the Cat doesn't make a lick of sense to you, don't worry about it. I definitely use the beat sheet and I definitely follow Save the Cat. It's the tool that made things click in my head, so it's what I choose to use, but you could use whatever you want. And then most importantly, to make the scene book, you really need a finished outline. Sorry. It's going to be harder for you to start making the scene book before you know exactly what you're supposed to put in it, but I suppose you could try to do it without the outline first, but I don't know how you would do it. I'm gonna be real honest. I don't know. So you'll definitely want to have your outline out and with you as you're making your scene book. However, let me put a huge caveat on this and say that when you're doing this, your outline will probably change. There's something about making the scene book and really digging into your book scene by scene that's going to just show every single weak spot, and that's okay, that's good, that's what we want. So try to be flexible. You need to have a pretty good idea of the story you want to tell. You need to know the beginning, you need to know the middle, you need to know the end. It'll be helpful if you know where the catalyst is, what the catalyst is, where the midpoint is, what the midpoint is. Those things are incredibly helpful. Also helpful to know the emotional B story of your book. It's going to be incredibly difficult to make the scene book effectively if you don't know what the emotional through line is, what your character needs to learn, how they need to change. But trust me on this, your outline's gonna change, it's gonna get better, you're gonna love it. Okay, so let's talk about structure. Because I use the 3-act structure, the way it's formatted is that Act 1 is 25% of your total word count, Act 2 is 50%, and then Act 3 is 25%. So Act 2 is obviously the largest. It is often the most intimidating. It's literally half of your book. For sake of ease, I like to give 5 chapters to Act 1, 10 chapters to Act 2, and then 5 chapters to Act 3. This was just the easiest way for my brain to do it. I'm gonna be real honest. Especially for planning purposes, I like to act as if everything is going to go perfectly according to plan. So 5, 10, 5. That's how I structured mine. I also give each of my chapters 3 specific scenes. Each scene leads into the next. There's a causation, there's a cause and effect that happens between each scene, which happens between each chapter. And this keeps the story moving. And for me, being able to see each scene one by one and see how each scene in each chapter feeds into the next one, that just makes all the pieces fit into place for me. Otherwise, I get distracted, I start thinking about what they're gonna eat for dinner, I start thinking about where they're going to the movies, you know, I get all mixed up in there. Because my word count goal for my first book was 90,000 words, that meant that each scene was approximately 1,500 words and each chapter was approximately 4,500 words. That's just what worked for me. Let me be totally and completely honest too, as soon as I started drafting, that went straight out the window. So if you have a better grasp on how you want to tell your story, please feel free to adapt this so that it works for you. If you know that one chapter needs to have 5 scenes and one chapter needs to have 2 scenes, go for it. Go for it. I had no idea what I was doing, so I needed to give myself these parameters, these ideas, to be able to get everything down on the page in a cohesive way. Because I put 3 scenes in each chapter and I have 20 chapters, I know that I'll have 60 scenes total in this book. Doesn't that just make it so much easier to stomach when you're like, oh, I only have to write 60 scenes. Like, I can write 60 scenes. I can write 1,500 words 60 times. I can write 4,500 words 20 times. It makes it so much more palatable for me. I'm like, oh yeah, I can definitely do that. But when I'm like, I have to write 90,000 words, I'd rather die. Okay. So the very first page in your scene book is going to be an act overview. Think of it truly as a table of contents. This is every single scene in every single chapter of your book, split up act by act, scene by scene, so that you can see it all in one place. This was really important to me to have this built in because I didn't want to have to fumble with opening more pages on Google Docs to see my full outline or wondering where the chapter breaks were or anything like that. I wanted to be able to just glance and be like, this is my whole book right here in my hands. So the act overview is very important to me. You'll also notice that I like to draw attention to the really pivotal moments in the plot. That's just because I am a really visual person, so I like to be like, hey, look, that's the catalyst, like don't mess it up. After you're done with your act overview, you're going to move right into your scenes. I actually don't show each chapter break in my scene book. I just move from one scene to the next so that I have a string of scenes. There's no extra stuff in there. It's just scene after scene after scene after scene. So I can just flip right through the book, and when one page is done, I never have to think about it again. So when I set up the scene, because I use a steno book, I do it side by side. The left side is for the action of the scene. And by action, I mean the physical plot, like the action, like literally what they're doing. I start by adding the scene number to the top left, and then under that, I typically put notes for setting, notes for mood, for tone, just so I can sort of set the scene. I know exactly where we're starting, I know where we're gonna go, that sort of thing. And then underneath that, I add another sticky note that has all of the physical action. Basically, I use the right side to document the emotionality of the scene. I use the right side to document every character in the scene and the character's motive. That way, I know I'm hitting those points for the B story. The B story is basically built in at this point. Plus, each scene should work for the character's emotional arc. At the end of the day, we're telling the story to see how our main character changes. And if a scene doesn't do that, if a character in a scene doesn't do that, they don't need to be there. That sounds kind of harsh, but it's true. You need your scenes to work for the story, and if they don't have a specific purpose, then it doesn't need to be there. And that's it. That's the whole scene book. Basically, you just do that for every single scene. So you're going to do that 59 more times. If you're like me and you have 20 chapters with 3 scenes each, you just do that over and over and over. And then you can pick up your scene book and you can be like, okay, great. This is everything I need to write right here in my book. That's it. That's the whole thing. That's all you have to do. I love it. Okay, so like, why should you make one? There's some real reasons that I think you should do this. And even if you use a different method, I think that digging into your outline and really understanding your story are helpful no matter what. So if you don't use a scene book, you can use something else, but this is the method that I like. The biggest reason that I like scene books is because you only have to focus on one scene at a time. A story is written scene by scene. That's all you have to think about. That's all you have to worry about. That's all you have to accomplish. It was really helpful to know that all I had to do was get through that scene, and then all I had to do was get through the next scene over and over, and that made it so much easier than feeling like I had to do it all at once. I had to do it all perfectly the first time. All I have to do is write one scene at a time. You're able to flip through pages one by one, and before you know it, there's your story. This is pretty specific to the beat sheet in particular, but if you make a scene book, you'll never hate the fun and game section ever again. By making the scene book, by making the act overview, by writing out scene by scene your book, you're definitely going to find weak spots. You're going to see holes in your plot, and you're going to know exactly where you need to fill it in. But I found the act overview particularly helpful in this because it was literally just an empty spot in the act overview, and I was like, oh, I should put a little something there, you feel me? None of the time you spend working on your outline, working on your scene book, putting the sticky notes in, drawing little graphics if you want, none of that time is wasted. What you're doing is developing your story with every minute spent on that scene book. You're getting to know your story better, you're getting to know your characters better, and by the time you sit down to draft, you'll really understand their motives, their journeys, the terrible jokes they're gonna make. It's all cooking up there. And then logistically speaking, I find that scene books are incredibly helpful because it's not online. I get really distracted when I'm drafting. I'm so badly distracted. So if I have to pull up another web browser, I'm definitely going to Twitter. Absolutely, no doubt about it, going to Twitter. No Twitter in a notebook. Also, if you use a word processor like an AlphaSmart, you won't be on a computer. So if your outline is only online and you need to reference it, which by the way, you should, you're gonna have a really hard time doing that, but not if you have a freaking notebook, okay? The notebook is right there whenever you need it. You can stick it in your backpack, you can stick it in your purse, you can take it with you wherever you're going. You never have an excuse not to have the scene book. So that's the overview of the scene book. I hope you guys found this video helpful. If you'd like to see more videos about how I outline, how I draft, how I revise, the kind of approaches that I take to the writing process, let me know. Drop a comment, you can like this video or subscribe to my channel if you want to see more. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today, so I'll see you soon.